Most legends shine so brightly that nobody dares stare at the shadows behind them. John Lennon, the voice who begged the world to give peace a chance, is still worshipped like a cultural prophet. His round glasses are symbols of idealism. His words are stitched into protest banners and written in history books. But what if the version of Lennon we celebrate is only half the picture? What if the truth behind the Beatle who preached love was far more complicated, fragile, and unsettling than fans ever imagined? Because behind the dreamy melodies and philosophical interviews lies a story full of contradictions. Moments that don't match the posters on dorm room walls. A man who shaped a generation with anthems of unity, yet struggled to practice the values he preached when cameras stopped rolling. This isn't about tearing down a legend just to watch dust fall. It's about exploring the person behind the monument. The raw, unfinished, uncomfortable story that history tends to whisper instead of shout. Lennon wasn't just a superstar, he was a symbol. But symbols don't bleed, people do. So today we dig beneath the halo, sift through the contradictions, and ask a simple but provocative question. Can you truly be the face of peace while waging war inside your own life? That's where this story begins. But once you see the real Lennon, you won't look at the myth the same way again. Before the posters, before the bed-ins, before the world claimed him as a cultural saint, John Lennon was just a kid growing up in Liverpool with more anger than direction. His childhood wasn't the humble and pure narrative we assign to musical icons. Lennon's early life was messy, cracked by loss and abandonment. His father left. His mother drifted in and out, then died tragically when he was 17. He was raised mostly by his Aunt Mimi, strict and proper, pushing his rebellious streak deeper. This rough, emotional soil created something potent, a boy who craved love fiercely but braced himself for hurt. Music became his armor, wit became his shield. He didn't want to fade into ordinary life. He wanted roar-level fame. The Beatles became that rocket, and at first, the world couldn't get enough. 4 mop tops, charming in coordinated suits, making crowds collapse in tears. Lennon was electric, sarcastic, brilliant, sharp enough to slice through interviews like they were butter. He felt unstoppable. The world worshipped him, and he began to believe he could shape it. Peace advocacy didn't come overnight. At first, Lennon played the part every superstar actor learns: rebellious but lovable, edgy but harmless. The Beatles were the world's sweetheart band, and he was the clever one. Fame didn't just find Lennon, he inhaled it. And fame, when you grow up feeling abandoned, becomes something like oxygen. Yet even in these golden years, cracks showed. Lennon could be cutting, bitter, unpredictable. Friends later described his moods as storms rolling across calm seas, charming one second, volatile the next. Stardom didn't fix him, it amplified whatever was already there. Still, as the world cheered, something else stirred in Lennon, a hunger to not just entertain, but transform. The boy who lost stability saw a chance to guide a generation, and when he sang, people listened like he was reading scripture. He had power, and once he realized it, the peace prophet era was born. But adoration is a dangerous drug, and Lennon soon learned the world can flip faster than a record on a turntable. Fame feeds confidence, and sometimes confidence crosses into arrogance. By 1966, Lennon wasn't just a musician, he was a global force. Every word he spoke ricocheted around the world. Interviews weren't harmless publicity, they were cultural events. So when Lennon casually remarked that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus, it wasn't a philosophical musing. It detonated like a cultural grenade. In some corners of the world, fans shrugged. They already saw the Beatles as near mythic. But in others, especially deeply religious regions of America, outrage erupted. Radio stations banned Beatles music. Families held record-burning parties. Preachers thundered from pulpits. Security threats escalated. The band, suddenly, wasn't just adored. It was seen as dangerous. Lennon apologized, but it wasn't a quiet humility moment. It felt defensive, cornered. The boy from Liverpool who craved validation now faced public fury on a scale few celebrities have endured. And somewhere inside that whirlwind, a realization hit him. Fame doesn't grant invincibility. It demands consequences. This moment didn't just bruise his ego, it rewired his public persona. Lennon became more outspoken, more political, more determined to challenge systems rather than play nice. Some call it awakening, others call it ego inflation with a megaphone. Either way, this moment cracked open the door to his activist era. If the world wanted him small, he was determined to become larger than life. Still, beneath the public fireworks, personal turbulence simmered. Fans saw protest signs and pianos. They didn't see the private battles brewing in Lennon's relationships, or the temper that sometimes exploded far away from flashing cameras. The peace prophet persona was forming, but so were the contradictions. And as the backlash finally faded, a more complicated truth was waiting behind closed doors. For many fans, the Lennon story stops at peace signs and protest songs. But those closest to him lived a very different chapter. Lennon's first wife, Cynthia, later described incidents where his temper crossed into physical and emotional aggression. Lennon himself, in interviews years later, admitted to being violent in his youth. That honesty shocked some fans, but it wasn't confessional purity. It was a shard of truth surfacing from a turbulent past. Cynthia wasn't the only one wounded in Lennon's orbit. His first son, Julian, has spoken openly about feeling abandoned. While Lennon preached universal love to millions, the love he gave his own child came in short, unpredictable doses. Julian once described hearing his father's emotional declarations to the world and wondering why that love didn't quite find its way home. It wasn't neglect in the tabloid sense. It was emotional absence, shadows where warmth should have been. This wasn't just youthful rebellion or rock star excess. It was a pattern. Lennon was brilliant, charismatic, and wounded, and those inner scars sometimes burst outward. Some say trauma shaped him. Others point out that pain doesn't excuse harm. Both truths can exist. The tragedy is how often they collided. At the time, fans didn't see this side. Social media didn't exist. Public image was tightly controlled. Lennon's poetry, his quirky interviews, his philosophical musings all painted a picture of a gentle revolutionary. So when bitterness crept into his marriage, or he disappeared emotionally from fatherhood, the world never noticed. The spotlight was too bright. It blinded more than it revealed. And yet, confronting this doesn't erase Lennon's musical brilliance or cultural impact. It just humanizes him. The world crowned a peace icon. But inside, he was still a boy fighting ghosts, and sometimes losing. The real contradictions were only beginning. Because even after one marriage crumbled and family bonds frayed, Lennon's story would drift into an even stranger chapter, where peace campaigns met chaotic personal choices. The era fans politely labeled The Lost Weekend wasn't a quirky vacation or mystical self-searching chapter. It was nearly 2 years of emotional chaos. In the early 1970s, Lennon split temporarily from Yoko Ono and moved to Los Angeles. He called it liberation. To friends, it looked more like free fall. He partied hard. He drank too much. Rumors swirled about substances, wild nights, and explosive behavior. Stories from this era have resurfaced in recent years, painting a portrait of a man trying to outrun something inside himself. He had an affair, openly. Yoko didn't just know. Some say she orchestrated parts of it, turning their relationship into something tangled and unconventional. Hollywood parties whispered about Lennon's unpredictability, his intensity, his vulnerability disguised as defiance. This wasn't the calm philosopher doing bed-ins for peace. This was the storm version Lennon, emotional, impulsive, struggling. The public saw fragments, music appearances, interviews, paparazzi shots, but behind it was a man swinging between genius and self-destruction, between romantic idealism and messy reality. Even his closest friends didn't quite know what version of Lennon would show up, the poetic dreamer or the guy who might start a fight over nothing. He once got into a drunken scuffle at a club, a far cry from the peace icon image. Fans didn't see that part. History muffled it for decades. Eventually, Lennon returned to Yoko, almost like a soldier limping home after a war he created in his own mind. The reunion didn't erase the damage or the chaos. It just marked a new chapter, one where Lennon tried to reinvent himself as a calmer soul, a devoted partner, a father again. But the lost weekend left marks on his legacy, whispered reminders that living like a symbol is very different than living as a human. And just when Lennon seemed to be rebuilding, fate struck in the most tragic way. When Lennon was taken from the world in December 1980, he didn't just pass. He ascended into cultural sainthood instantly. Newspapers printed halos, fans wept in public squares, murals rose, songs filled the air. The world mourned not just a musician, but the idea of him. That instant canonization froze Lennon in time. The peace icon, the visionary, the dreamer. But frozen images are never full stories. Death sealed his legacy in a way life never could, scrubbing out complexities and polishing flaws into shiny mythology. And this is where the tension sits. Lennon shaped global culture. He wrote songs that changed movements. He challenged systems. He imagined a gentler world. Those contributions are real. They matter deeply. But so does honesty. If we worship icons instead of understanding humans, we risk turning art into religion and artists into untouchable saints. Lennon preached peace yet battled anger. He sang about love while breaking hearts. He guided millions but sometimes stumbled in his own home. That doesn't cancel him. It complicates him. And complexity is where real legacy lives. Fans today debate his contradictions. Scholars unpack his psychology. His son Julian has carved his own relationship with his father's memory, both honoring him and speaking truth. Nobody denies Lennon's brilliance, but fewer are willing to pretend perfection anymore. Understanding Lennon means accepting duality, the dreamer and the flawed man, the visionary and the wounded soul, the voice that called for peace, and the person still learning how to embody it. And that brings us to the question every icon eventually faces. Do we judge them by their art, their impact, or their humanity? Lennon forces us to confront all three. History rarely tells simple stories. Lennon's begs us not to try. John Lennon's legacy isn't one-dimensional. He was brilliant, fragile, visionary, flawed, selfish, generous, wounded, transformative, and sometimes harmful. We don't lose anything by acknowledging the full picture. In fact, we gain something, the reminder that greatness isn't purity, influence isn't sainthood, and powerful ideas can come from imperfect souls. Maybe that's the most human truth of all. Legends can inspire us, but learning from their flaws matters just as much as admiring their triumphs. When we see the whole story, we don't diminish Lennon. We simply stop pretending peace comes without a fight, especially inside the one holding the microphone. Icons aren't born perfect. They evolve, struggle, break, and rebuild. Lennon did all of that in public. And even his darkest contradictions don't erase his impact. They just ask us to look closer and learn deeper, because behind every myth is a person, and understanding the person is where the real story lives.